Hi, I'm Tony.
And I'm Patrick.
And we'd like to welcome you to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. We are working our way through Professor Nancy Pearcey's book called Finding Truth, 5 Principles for Unmasking Atheism, Secularism, and Other God Substitutes. And we have just finished her critique, right, briefly, of post-modernism. She kind of explained it, and then she pointed out at least some of the things that were problematic with it, and then showed briefly how Christianity kind of overcome those types of things, right? So next what she does is move to considering from this perspective, that is reductionism, right? So this is principle number 2, identify the reductionism. And so from that perspective, she wants to look at two religions, Pantheism and Islam. So let's take up her discussion of Pantheism, right? And this section is called Pantheism versus You, which is kind of interesting, right? Because what she's going to say here is that in Pantheism, there is no you.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So she says Pantheism is typically summarized as the doctrine that God is the universe and the universe is God, right? So pan means all, and of course theism means God. So God is called the one or the all. The world is seen as a manifestation or emanation of the divine essence, right? And so we're all, the whole world is part of this. In Pantheism, the divine is an underlying spiritual unity, the one. What slips through the problem here, at least part of the problem, she says, what slips through the sieve here is diversity. There is no diversity.
Right.
There is no difference. There is no individuality, right? She says,
the same.
Yeah, just one. In Hinduism, your individual identity is actually called Maya, which means illusion, right? So our individual you are an illusion. Sorry, Patrick.
Well, you are too, so it's okay.
Okay. So what goes around comes around, right? It is regarded as the cause of evil, selfishness, greed, and war. The goal of meditation, then, is to dissolve your sense of being a separate self by merging with the cosmic one, the undifferentiated, right? Like a drop of water dissipates into an ocean. Right. That's the kind of thing, right? In Buddhism, for instance, the word nirvana means literally to become extinguished, right?
Yeah, there's that kind of quote from kind of Buddhist philosophy is how do I transcend? And the yogi or the monk or whoever tells the individual that they have to get rid of the word how and the word I, and so it's just transcend. So it's one of those abilities to just kind of almost say nothing and sound super smart.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Of course, if you say nothing, it's hard to sound anything.
Right. Well, that's what Nirvana is going to get you.
Gotcha.
This really good place that we want to become extinguished.
So what's the problem here? Well, she says the implicit message then in this type of approach is that the individual self has so little value that it ought to be dissolved into the one. Yeah. Right? So no value for individuals. It was never really there in the first place. It was an illusion, right? So another reason Pantheism leads, she suggests here, to a lower view of human life is that the divine is non-personal. Right. So there's no personal divine here, right? In classic pantheism, the concept of the divine is not a personal deity who thinks, wills, feels, and acts. Instead, it is a non-personal, non-thinking, non-acting spiritual substratum underlying all things, right? She quotes here a former Zen Buddhist who converted to Christianity, saying, explains that in pantheism, the divine is, quote, an unconscious and impersonal essence, which may be called God or nature or the absolute oneness, right, end quote. So as a result, surprisingly, she says pantheism is not all that different from materialism, right? It's kind of the flip side of the coin, she says. Materialism claims that everything consists of material stuff, and pantheism claims that everything consists of spiritual stuff, right? Both are non-personal. And so again, pantheism versus you, right?
Yeah. So you're you're wanting to meld into this oneness, and so you step into like a river, and the river is rushing by, and all of a sudden your body starts to form into the river itself, and soon you become one with the river. And so where's the you? Well, it's no longer there. It's just the river. And so you have to be content with the fact that yourself is done away with, and you've done all the you've merged away all the evil and bad stuff and individualism and the wants and desires, and you've just become part of the river, and that's kind of your great mission in life. Although, what's the point of
to get
your
out of
life?
the cycle of samsara and become part of the one, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, and ironically, this kind of is similar to the end stage for Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses have this idea that that you yourself, if you were to kind of be resurrected on Judgment Day, you gets just thrown away with and done. And so the you that comes back and is formulated is in the perfect mind of God. And so it's not really you that comes back. It's God's mental image of you recreated. So what's the point of you wanting to reach the end goal if you aren't there at the end? Sure, it's some version of you, but that's not the you that you want. The you that you
were you that was you.
Yeah. That's the secondary you prime.
She says that both materialism and pantheism define ultimate reality, notice, in non-personal terms, and therefore both fail to account for human personhood, right? So they depersonalize us, really, is what's going on here. They end up denying, degenerating, and devaluing the unique features of human persons. Humans are reduced, there it is, the reductionism, right, to products of non-personal forces. The individual, as you were suggesting, dissolves.
Right.
And she says, into the rock of the mountainside or the river or whatever.
Yeah. Right? And why do those things need more substance than me? I don't know.
She says the puzzling question is why these worldviews are at all popular. After all, we long for most of all is to be known and loved for who we are as unique persons, right? And a longing that can only be met if the divine is a person. And so the God of Christianity does not erase our individual identity, but actually affirms it. Right? God affirms our individual identity. He calls us to become ever more fully the unique individuals we were created to be. Contrary to Eastern mysticism, she tells us the goal is not to suppress our desires, right? That's Buddhism. But to direct them to what truly satisfies, to a passionate love relationship with the ultimate transcendent person. Right? So just the opposite of what this particular pantheistic type of philosophy or religion teaches. Yeah.
So you don't dissolve yourself and are done away with in these shaving your head and same robes and the teachers you go to are those that are further along the path of denying themselves, but yet they're in a position of authority, which seems odd too. But God uses your individual uniqueness for his purpose and his glory.
Amen.
All right, so we've covered something that is atheistic in materialism. We've covered something that's atheistic in postmodernism. We've covered something that is polytheistic, super polytheistic, pantheism. And now, what do we do when we come face to face with a monotheistic version like Islam? And so, does our Romans 1 challenge still hold here? Does Islam, with its different view of who God is, does it also enter into this devaluing humanity in some way that is
reductionism that results in devaluing of humans, right? Yeah.
Well, okay, so we won't get into the idea of does the Muslim God equal the same thing as the Judeo-Christian God, but we can come to an agreement that our version of Jesus and their version of Jesus, someone's wrong.
Right.
Maybe both, sure, but there's a differences that you can point to. The Quran teaches that Jesus is not divine, but is only a messenger of Allah, and that the Quran continuously emphasizes the unity and oneness of God. It can be said that the version of very raison d'etre of Islam is to assert in a final and categorical manner the oneness of God and the nothingness of all before the majesty of that one. And that is very prominent. The monotheism in Islam is absolute. There is no concept of a trinity. That's I believe the term is tawhid. It's blasphemous to the point of damnation. That's done there. So as a consequence, then, the Islamic concept of divinity is missing a key element of personhood. For example, consider the qualities associated with the relationship. Only within a relationship can God express interpersonal attributes such as love, sympathy, intimacy, self-giving, and communication. Only distinctions between persons can there be giving and taking, in initiating, responding, sharing, and self-reflection, union, and communion. So when we say things like God is love, well, that's a characteristic version of God. God doesn't learn to love, and
it's part of the nature of
God. Having just a complete oneness of Himself, no three persons in a Godhead. God must create and then learn to love.
So in a God who is just one, if that God is going to love, that God has to create something to love, and therefore God's ability to love, we might say, is or God's actual loving is dependent on God's creation. Right. Because He has to create in order to love, because love you have to have relationship in order to love.
There's another thing focused within that. I love my car.
And of course, clearly in monotheistic religions like this, they would not want to say that God is dependent on His creation. Right. For anything.
And we would agree. We would agree.
And so Christianity solves that issue,
right? For God to be fully personal, then capable of love and community, there must be genuine plurality within the divine being itself. Historic Christian theology teaches that these interpersonal attributes were expressed from all eternity among three persons of the Trinity. In this way, Christianity is able to maintain within the Godhead the highest conception of what it means to be a personal being, self-reliance.
Right. Love, sympathy, intimacy, communication, all those types of things then is allowed for in the triune God, and is not allowed for if God is just one until after that God creates. And again, that makes God dependent on His creation.
Need to create. And so we might ask something like, can God be a judge? Can he learn judgment? Because then He has to create, right? Well, being a judge isn't a characteristic imbued upon Him. That's a role that He takes on. So if you were to come, a Muslim were to ask you that, well, God needs us in order to judge us and separate the sheep from the goats, right? And so He's dependent on us in order to be a judge. Well, judgment is something that He takes on as far as a role, but not something that's a characteristic within Himself. So only a God of love is fully personal. Thus, the Trinity is crucial for maintaining a fully personal concept of God. And this explains a great deal of Muslim worship consistent in near mechanical rituals. Worships recite the Quran in unison, word for word, by memory, in the original Arabic. To quote this person, its spirituality is repetitious and impersonal. Not a chosen, deliberate love of God from all your heart, mind, and soul. And so this oneness, this need to be separate from kind of His people. That's what the kind of the type of God Allah is that Muslims are worshiping. This is acceptable, the author says, because in Islam, understanding is secondary. recitation and ritual.
Yeah,
And
they don't even have to understand what they're reciting.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a, we might say, mindless recitation.
Yeah, and even when you hear about Westerners being captured, and they've accepted the teachings of Allah and accepted Quranic teaching. There's kind of this incantation that you do. So kind of like how Christians have this bizarre ritual of sinner's prayer, that is not biblical, and if done just as a mantra, I don't even think the most Southern Baptist person would agree that brings about salvation. But within Islam, you don't even need to know the words. In fact, having a more precise pronunciation of the Arabic is way more important than your
understanding what it's saying. Right?
Yeah, your desire, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's that. So that's how it devalues us as well. It's kind of a mindless process that you don't even know. Your heart, soul, mind can be separate from your beliefs, and that's something that we don't see working within nature either. So it reduces humans within that kind of bifurcating aspect.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So okay. So that finishes her her discussion of these two religions with regard to reductionism, right? And again, the point is when you have a ultimate reality that doesn't include the true and the living God, something is left out, and you have to. So there's a reductionism that goes on, and that affects your view of people, right? That reductionism affects your view of people. It also affects how you treat people,
right?
Which is what she's going to talk about next with regard to the Nazis, right?
The ideologies.
Yeah, so she's going to look at a couple of ideologies here. Now, she begins this section, it says, from secular idols to death camps. She says one of the most powerful ways to engage with seekers and skeptics is to help them to identify their own idols.
Very good.
The idols are easier to recognize when lived out in practice, especially when they are incarnate in politics and public policy. So we can see, she suggests, the idol more clearly. And so she wants us to take a look here at Nazism and communism as illustrations of what's going on here. She says historians have often wondered how such mind-staggering barbarianism could emerge in modern civilized Europe, right? The answer lies, she says, in the power of idols. Nazi doctrine was organized around the idol of race. An individual's race, Aryan or Jew or Slavic, was said to determine the person's views, character, and even how much they were worth, right? So communist ideology, she says, was organized around the idols of economic class. So Nazism, race, communism, economic class. A person's economic class, capitalism of proletariat, was held to be the all-determining factor. And, of course, as we've seen in every idol-based worldview, some parts of the creation will not fit into the box, right? And so it has to be some facts of general revelation. Then if they can't fit into the box, you have to suppress them some kind of way, right? Or pretend they don't exist, call them an illusion, or whatever.
Physically suppress them.
In this case, that's what's going on, right? So she says, she says, when idol-centered worldviews are applied in the political realm, there will be some people who do not fit in the state's prescribed box, and as you said, right, they'll be physically suppressed, who will literally be suppressed and even killed. So under Nazism, those who did not fit in the prescribed box of race included Jews and Gypsies and Slavs and Serbs and Poles and Ukrainians and others. They were transported to concentration camps where about 25 million died or were shot to death.
Right.
Under communism, those who did not fit into the prescribed box of economic class included capitalists and others. They were subject to forced famines or hard labor camps where an estimated 85 to 100 million died or were shot to death. So both regimes rounded up dissenting Christians, by the way.
Yeah, there. Yeah. Again, because you have a paracultural, para-economic, para-race ideology, and so Christians are going to be involved in all those things.
Yeah, so millions of people were killed as a result of ideologies during this time, right?
So are you saying that someone's beliefs affect their actions?
It is amazing, isn't it? Yeah. She says the lesson here is that the idol-based ideologies are invariably dehumanizing, right? And if unchecked, they lead to repression, coercion, oppression, war, and violence. In the 20th century alone, they have taken far more lives and created more havoc than all the religiously motivated witch hunts, inquisitions, and wars of the previous centuries.
Right. And, we're not just talking about Russia here. We're talking about communist China. We're talking about half of Central America. Yeah. And again, from an economic standpoint, you can only get blood from a stone for so long until you run out of stone to crush. And so, the evil capitalists were building these farms or these sugar plantations, or for Cuba, and then oil reserves in Brazil, Ecuador area, and then just taking over. And no, you're the terrible people. You're the bourgeoisie. Yeah. It's time for the workers who have been oppressed to rise up.
That's right.
And to overtake and famine tends to be the biggest thing. And then you need to re-educate people because for some odd reason people don't like when their stuff's taken, and you have to say everyone is equal. Everyone, according to your means is what you must take, but sometimes you just don't want to dig a hole. And everyone wants to be the poet and the philosopher in those ones. No one wants to help bury the bodies.
Yeah, good. Here's a really interesting point she makes here. She says the bloodshed and death camps produced by idolatrous ideologies, thank you, were not noticed a violation of their principles.
Yeah.
Right? They were logically consistent working out of their worldview, whereas with religious wars regarding Christianity, that was a violation of Christian principles. Right. And so their violence was just a working out of what their principles were. The religious violence was really contrary to the principles of Christianity.
Yeah. And this is a point that Bahnsen and Stein bring up in their infamous debate, is Bahnsen asking Stein, is what the Nazis did wrong? And so Stein would say, well, within the whole of Eastern Europe, yes, what they did was wrong. Well, again, he's drawing a circle based on where he wants to, be right. But drawing a circle within Nazi Germany at the time, he'd be wrong. And then continue to draw your circle out further and say that there's a universal concept where all men should be held accountable to crimes against humanity, and you
right. And so when you ask the question, why?
Right.
Why?
Why the circle?
Or why should they be held accountable? Right. Well, without some type of transcendence being, there is no.
What is justice?
Yeah, that kind of stuff, right? I mean, we don't hold men accountable to killing plants and eating them.
Yeah, or on the Autobahn you can drive 200 miles an hour. You can't do that on our highways. So we don't hold Germans accountable for our speed limits. So what difference does it make what they do within the confines of their own circle?
Yeah.
So the study of worldview is not merely a theoretical subject, as we've just discussed, to be discussed hypothetically in a classroom. Idols have life and death consequences. When Romans 1 says that God gives people up to their destructive impact of their idols, that does not mean only personal behavior. Worldviews are also incarnated in the classroom, in the boardroom, in the courtroom, legislative chamber, and the theater of war. And we see that. And again, is a claim of holding to an ideal and someone in violation of that, or are they are they congruent with their own ideology? That's something to look at when we discuss worldviews. Modern totalitarianism illustrates Paul's teaching that those who do not know God will fall under the yoke of idols. They will be enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. So Christianity offers the entire puzzle with all the pieces in harmony, creating an image of enchanting beauty. It gives a far richer, fuller, more complex version of reality than any other worldview. Christianity includes the valid insights of all other worldviews while avoiding their weaknesses. Yeah. We get our cake and eat it too. Because again, we're not saying that there aren't differences between different races of people or within the confines of a city. You're going to have cultural significance based on music or culture or what's worshipped. Those things are important aspects. In fact, talking about disproportionality within economic classes is something that's important and should be studied. And outcomes based on those studies are done. And saying, however, one part of those should be killed is a much bigger step up than maybe we can restructure the political process so that more people keep their money and therefore can move up and down the economic ladder more easily. So again, what's the difference? Well, the valuation of human life. Right. If all you are is just a product of your position in the economic class, then sure, you want to kill the bourgeoisie and eat the rich, but you don't want to do that to the worker because that's the one who works the land. Except then you don't have a central a person that owns the property to care about it, and it falls into repute, and then a bunch of people starve to death. So, so again, there are positives that these ideologies bring as far as illuminating what human behavior is or just human nature is. But Christianity is the one that can explain all of it and gives a better view, and there's a lot less death.
Because it unifies all of these, and you're right, and yeah.
Right. If that's important to you, I guess. Yeah.
So in her summary at the end of the chapter, she says, what is the common thread running through all of the examples in this chapter? Religions and worldviews that deny the biblical God must treat something else as the ultimate reality. Right. That's principle one, right? With the exception of other monotheistic religions, they deify something immanent within the cosmos. They absolutize some aspect of creation as the ultimate explainer. Right? They reduce everything else then to a single category. That's principle two, the reductionism, right? Reductionism, she says, is like trying to see the world through a single lens, right? G.K. Chesterton called reductionism a mental prison. Whatever does not fit in that prison then is denied and suppressed. Right, and that's what she's trying to point out here. And so she says the result is always a vision of the world that is narrower, poorer, darker, less humane than the biblical picture. A worldview's concept of humanity cannot be higher than its concept of the divine. Right, that's as high as it can go. Romans 1 starts its teaching on idols by saying that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. There's probably nothing that modern people hate more about religion than to the talk of the wrath of God.
Oh, right? Man.
It suggests a picture of an angry, vengeful deity, but the biblical concept of wrath often refers simply to God's impeccable opposition to evil and injustice.
Isn't that what we want?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that the whole view of why would God allow evil things? Okay, well then let God take out this group of people that are slaughtering and eating their own children. Yeah. Whoa, that's genocide. We cannot have that. What is this vengeful God doing? He just needs to snap his finger like Thanos and make everyone good and conform. Oh, but we don't want to be robots. We want to be have freedom to choose, and one of those abilities to choose is to choose evil, right? So again, wherever you fall, you're not going to land. So let's stick to biblical truth and declare who God is, because that's where the truth lies.
Right. In fact, she says that wrath doesn't even necessarily mean divine intervention in human affairs at all. Right.
Sometimes.
And as we've seen in Principle 2, God's judgment often consists in notice, giving people what they want.
Right.
Letting them experience the self-inflicted consequences of their choices.
Yeah.
That's part of the judgment, right? Okay, fine, you want to go that way. All right, you can go that way, right?
Yeah. You want to distill everything down to the oppressed versus oppressors within race or economic class. I mean, you're essentially looking at the political process of 2020 Western world as we speak, and that tends to be God removing His hand and His blessing from a nation or a people, or hey, if you want to go with this your own way, good luck. And so enjoy being at each other's throats.
She says our hearts, though, should break for these people.
Yeah,
whose
absolutely.
worldviews are dark and dehumanizing and demeaning and dishonoring to human persons, right?
Yeah.
An opportunity is wide open, she says, to present Christianity as radically positive and humane. A biblical worldview does not, makes deities any aspect of the created order. It doesn't set up a false absolute. And so as a consequence, it does not lead to reductionism that devalues or denies the other dimensions of creation. It does not have to shove the universe into a box and slice off whatever doesn't fit, right? It's not an exclusive, but an inclusive type of thing, affirming the goodness and reality of all of God's diverse and multifaceted creation, including people, persons. Right? Yeah.
Right. So that is our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal is not to say I won. It's ultimately to say God won, and we want more people to value that as well. Yeah. To recognize that, and as Dr. Mitch Stokes says, that we should love what God loves.
Yeah. Good. She says Christianity fulfills the human hunger for a unified, integrated worldview to live by.
Yeah.
Right. With everything that's together.
Yeah.
And not piecemealed and things cut off and that kind of stuff.
And
right?
it's a good charge for us to look at our own presuppositions, our own what we bring to the table for our own traditions. That's a big one. Is we've always done this way, or this is right because, well, I guess I've never self-examined it. Those are things we should again bring under the authority of the transcendent God and say, are my actions in sync with what He says is the proper path? Yeah. So think of it like a train track versus a road. If you have a train that's all over the road, it's slipping, sliding, it's setting off spark, it's going into the ravine sooner than later, but the track tells you, okay, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. It takes a little while to speed up, takes a little while to slow down, but ultimately I'm on the right path because I'm within the groove of how we were all made.
That's right. Trains were made to run on tracks.
That's right.
If the train says, I want freedom, get me off of this track, what happens to the train, right? There is no freedom. It gets bogged down, right?
Exactly.
And it can't move. No, trains were made to run on the tracks, and we're created to run on the track that God has created us to run on.
Right.
She says Christianity has the intellectual resources to provide a holistic, internal, consistent guide to life, and so it is attractive, and we should work to help people to understand that. But she says being attractive does not mean a worldview is true. To test whether it is true or false, we need to move to principle 3, which we will take a look at next time.
Right. So principle 3 and 4 kind of go well together, but kind of in the meantime, we're going to take a break. We're going to present you probably an interview that should be fun, entertaining. Still covers topics like apologetics, but it'll kind of give you a breather because we essentially did 4 parts to this one chapter. So even we need a break from what we're doing. So
good. Sounds good.
Yeah, join us.
Forward to that.
Join us next time. Share the videos. View them however you like. Watch the episodes backwards if you want to, but hopefully you're getting something out of this, and we'd like to hear from you as well. So feel free to leave comments wherever you might find us, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.